Viewer advisory. This video employs a unique visual style that some may find annoying. Lots and lots and lots of groan-worthy, eye-rolling, and painfully literal images that some may feel have absolutely nothing to do with the subject matter. But hey, I guess not everyone can have a sense of humor, right? Just kidding. In all seriousness, I know this specific brand of senile dad joke energy isn't everyone's cup of tea. But to those of you hoping I'll eventually change my ways, sorry, that's just how I roll. Of course, if you don't like my tea, you're more than welcome to start your own channel and do things your way. In fact, let me know when you do. I'm always looking for new content to help me sleep. Proceed with caution. Overexposure. It's what happens when a company creates a character that just clicks, and suddenly they've got a golden goose, and all you want to do is for that goose to keep laying eggs. So these characters end up everywhere. Lunchboxes, t-shirts, underwear, and headlining every comic and every cartoon, often at the expense of everyone else around them. Snake Eyes, Grogu, Wolverine, Ryan Reynolds. Sooner or later, beloved becomes annoying, and the last thing you want is more of them shoved in your face. And with that in mind, do we really need another video on this guy? Let me ask you something. What's one of the oldest, most reliable storytelling devices in the book? The one that works across every culture, every genre, every medium, from ancient myth to modern blockbuster. The underdog. Because almost everyone at some point in their lives has felt like one. That feeling of being the smallest one in the room, or staring down odds that seem genuinely impossible and thinking, there's no chance in hell you'll get through this one. Or maybe, on a more personal note for this audience, it was just being the smallest kid in school who happened to really love robots. The underdog resonates because it's relatable. And from a storytelling standpoint, that relatability is golden. It gives the audience a way in, a bridge between what's more than meets the eye and what the eye actually sees. The Transformers were full of characters we could look up to. The razor-sharp and intelligent Prowl, the effortlessly cool Jazz, and of course, Optimus Prime. Noble, selfless, the gold standard of leadership. The one everybody loved and, more importantly, wanted to be. But here's the thing. You can't be Optimus Prime on day one. Nobody starts there. We all have to start somewhere smaller, somewhere more uncertain, somewhere more us. And that's exactly where Bumblebee lives. In the original 1984 animated series, Bumblebee's role was specific and deliberate. He wasn't there to be the toughest fighter or the cleverest strategist. He was there to be the aforementioned bridge, the human-sized entry point into a war between giants. His relationship with Spike Witwicky was the emotional core of the early show, not Optimus Prime's speeches or Megatron's evil machinations, but this unlikely friendship between a hard hat-wearing teenager from a floating oil platform and a little yellow alien robot who just wanted to help. Bumblebee cared about Spike in a way that felt real. He was curious about humans, protective of them, and critically, he was one of the few Autobots who didn't make Spike feel like a liability. And that warmth made him the audience's surrogate, the character through whom a kid watching TV could imagine themselves standing alongside, or better yet, riding off on an adventure with. Bumblebee's tech spec told the same story. On paper, he was the weakest Autobot. Strength, 2. Firepower, 1. But his courage was a perfect 10. His intelligence was an 8. And his official motto, the least likely can be the most dangerous. That's the whole character right there. An underdog who refused to accept what the numbers said about him. Bee's role in the original Marvel Comics run was similar in spirit, but somewhat less prominent on the page. More of a supporting player in a book juggling an enormous cast. The core identity was the same though. Small, brave, fiercely devoted to the mission and to the humans caught in the crossfire. Bob Budiansky, the Marvel editor who named and defined the vast majority of the Generation 1 cast over one most likely extremely caffeinated Thanksgiving weekend in 1983, pulled the character almost entirely from the toy's physical appearance. He looked at this squat, round, yellow Volkswagen Beetle and thought, Bumblebee. Simple as that. He's even gone on record saying that had they handed him a yellow Camaro instead, the character would never have been named after that little buzzing insect. The whole identity, the name, the warmth, the smallness, came directly from that little VW bug, which, as it turns out, has its own little story to tell. Before Bumblebee was an Autobot, before he was even a Transformer, he was a toy car, specifically the MC04 Mini Car Robo number 3, VW Beetle, from Takara's 1983 Microman Microchange line, available in yellow, red, and blue. Its design was inspired by Takara's Koro Q line, those tiny little pullback toy cars that most of the Western world might remember being imported as penny racers. Extremely cute little cars with chunky proportions and oversized wheels, named for a slot at the rear designed to hold a penny, which acted as a counterweight so the pullback motor could pop wheelies. That super deformed or chibi aesthetic turned out to be quite important. It gave the original Bumblebee toy, and by extension his cartoon character, an inherently non-threatening quality. Wide-eyed, small, almost childlike in silhouette. While the rest of the Autobot cast came from Takara's Diaclone line, sleek, angular, imposing sports cars and trucks, Bumblebee looked like something a kid would gravitate towards and, I don't know, wanna protect? The design literally hardwired empathy into the character before a single word of fiction was written, making Bee one of the most popular characters and, I'd imagine, one of the most sought-after toys in those initial years of the Transformers. That being said, despite it seeming like Bee has always just been there, what often gets forgotten is that aside from the brand going dormant after the failure of Generation 2 in the early 90s, Bumblebee as a character actually ceased to exist for a time. Not dramatically, not with a big send-off, he just faded. The franchise moved on. When Beast Wars arrived, the toys became animals, and a character named Bumblebee transforming into an actual bee would have been legally considered descriptive, which is a trademark problem, not a creative one. So Hasbro quietly stepped away from the name and the character, but the role that Bumblebee played didn't disappear. It never does, because the underdog archetype is too useful to abandon. You always need the young one, the scrappy one. Okay, maybe not that scrappy one. Basically, the one the audience can identify with. In Beast Wars, that slot went to Cheetor, young, impulsive, constantly getting himself into trouble and just barely getting himself back out. And when the franchise returned to vehicle modes with Transformers Armada in 2002, the role landed on Hotshot, a brash, speed-obsessed, fiercely loyal young Autobot who was basically Bumblebee's personality transplanted into a sports car with considerably more attitude. The thing about Hotshot, though, is that he brought something new to the archetype. Where G1 Bumblebee was cautious and earnest, Hotshot was reckless and loud. He was the underdog who didn't think of himself as an underdog, and that cocky energy felt more fitting for the early 2000s, when every kid's cartoon hero needed to be a little bit of an annoying punk. And I mean that with love. Mostly. But here's the twist. Hasbro had actually wanted to bring Bumblebee back by this point. The plan was to use the name for the Armada Yellow sports car character. Unfortunately, they couldn't. The trademark on Bumblebee had lapsed during the franchise's long Beast Wars hibernation, and in 2003, a toy manufacturer called Playcore swooped in and registered it. Not for a competing robot, but for a children's outdoor swing set, a swing and slide product called Buzz the Bumblebee. Can you imagine? An iconic franchise and character held hostage by a swing set. So Hotshot it was. And weirdly, that creative detour ended up shaping who Bumblebee would become when he finally returned. But before we get to the modern era, it's worth going back to the 80s, where there was already an effort being made to push Bumblebee forward, to make him Well, grow up. As the G1 toy line moved into its third and fourth year, commercial pressure demanded character evolution. New toys meant new forms, and writers had to justify them somehow. For Bumblebee, that evolution arrived as Goldbug, and depending on which version of the story you followed, it meant very different things. In the Sunbow animated series, it was handled pretty simply. Bumblebee gets badly damaged during the events around the return of Optimus Prime, gets rebuilt by a Quintesson into a shiny gold body, and cheerfully announces he feels like a gold bug. And Optimus Prime, freshly resurrected and apparently in a naming mood, just goes ahead and calls him Goldbug. Done. He's basically the same guy with a new paint job and a blue head, back to rocking that masked look of the original toy. And that was good enough for the show. The Marvel Comics continuity, though, that version went somewhere interesting. In that story, Bumblebee is completely obliterated, not damaged, obliterated. During the obligatory initial misunderstanding between good guys in the very first Transformers and G.I. Joe crossover, those real American heroes, perceiving B as a threat, just absolutely blow poor B to bits. Fortunately, his brain core survives and Ratchet rebuilds him from scratch. And when he wakes up in a brand new, significantly more powerful body, he makes a choice. He refuses to go back to being Bumblebee. He rejects the name. He adopts Goldbug, a deliberate, conscious break from everything the old identity represented. Tired of being the team's mascot, tired of being patted on the head while the big bots handled the real work, Goldbug was harder, more serious, more willing to lead, and his tech specs reflected it. Strength jumped from 2 all the way to 9, and he was given command of his own unit, the Throttlebots. Now, despite the obvious upgrade, the Goldbug persona ultimately didn't stick. By the late G1 era, Hasbro stopped pretending and brought back Bumblebee as a pretender, because that was the name people recognized. And eventually, in later IDW comics, which we'll definitely get into more shortly, Goldbug actually became his own separate, if rather inconsequential character, entirely distinct from Bumblebee. Regardless of that failed attempt at change though, the template Goldbug established, the idea of Bumblebee as someone capable of maturity, of genuine leadership, of hard-won survival, didn't go away. It just sat quietly in the background, waiting for the right moment to return and blossom, which it eventually did in live action. In 2007, the very first live-action Transformers movie, directed by Mr. Kaboom himself, Michael Bay, premiered. And this is where everything changed. When Paramount and Hasbro were developing the film, executive producer Steven Spielberg had a very specific vision for its emotional core. He wanted a boy and his car story. Something intimate and grounded in the middle of all the chaos. An E.T.-style bond with a kid and something alien and extraordinary. And the character chosen to anchor that story was Bumblebee. And it's here where Bay had some notes. First, the Volkswagen Beetle had to go. Bay was convinced that it would draw too many comparisons to Herbie, the love bug, and he wanted his Bumblebee to be cool. The solution was a Chevrolet Camaro, initially a beat-up 1977 model that Sam Witwicky picks up at a used car lot, before B upgrades himself into a sleek 2006 fifth-generation concept version. And before long, what started as a movie about the relationship between a boy and his car turned into more of a relationship between a movie and a car company, as the automotive partnership that followed essentially rewrote how product placement works in blockbuster cinema, and more importantly, it gave Bumblebee an entirely new visual identity. He wasn't a compact economy car anymore, he was American muscle. Second, and this one took some negotiation, Bumblebee would not speak. There was apparently a real disagreement between the studio and Hasbro during pre-production, showing their Jon Snow card that they knew nothing about Transformers. Paramount wanted the robots largely silent to emphasize their alien nature. Hasbro wanted them talking because talking characters sell more toys. The compromise that writers Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman landed on was pretty clever. Bumblebee's voice box would be damaged, forcing him to communicate through radio broadcasts, song lyrics, and movie quotes pulled from Earth's own media. James Brown's I Feel Good, the Jaws theme, lines from Forrest Gump, fragments of Apollo 13, Bumblebee assembled his emotions out of humanity's own creative output, which was both funny and honestly a little poignant. He was an alien trying to speak to us in our own language because his had been taken away from him. It made him feel less like a bee and more like a lost, injured puppy, a warrior with a wound, and audiences loved it. The gimmick worked so well that even after Ratchet apparently fixes his voice at the end of the first film, he's right back to the radio clips in Revenge of the Fallen. Because why fix what isn't broken? Yes, his voice box was broken, but the box office gold formula wasn't. As the Bay films progressed, Bumblebee's character evolved in a fascinating, somewhat unintentional way. Movie after movie, as the revolving roster of Autobots came and went, established and loved characters, getting big introductions before unceremoniously dropping like flies or simply disappearing. Bumblebee remained. He became, almost by default, Optimus Prime's most trusted lieutenant, his ride or die. Less the eager rookie and more the veteran who'd simply outlasted everyone else. He even somewhat ironically outlasted Sam Witwicky, his original boy, when the fourth film recast the human lead entirely. Since then, there have been efforts in more recent entries to soften him back towards his roots. First, we have the 2018 Bumblebee prequel film, which leaned hard into the puppy mode version. Damaged amnesiac, rebuilding a connection with a grieving teenager named Charlie Watson. While the premise does sound rather, ordinary, I think that the director, Travis Knight, did a great job at telling a familiar tale while still keeping it heartfelt and entertaining, which gives me hope for the new film that he's directing, which as of this writing is yet to be released, based on another beloved 80s cartoon and toy property, Masters of the Universe. Speaking of which, any fans of muscle-bound heroes and villains who are masters of their own universe out there? If there are, I give you my new channel dedicated solely to the peeps of Eternia, Stories from Grayskull. Same irreverent Gen X humor and nostalgic deep dives you get here, just with a lot more furry diapers and magical swords. Please check it out and show it some love with a like, comment, share, and sub. That being said, however you choose to help will be greatly appreciated, so thank you. Anyway, it was around this time that other creators were finding more ways to present the Bumblebee character, such as in Netflix's War for Cybertron trilogy, which gave us sort of an anti-Bee in a way, an individual not identified by his loyalty to the Autobot cause, at least initially, but who is a neutral, self-interested Energon scavenger, who actively wanted nothing to do with either side of the war. That being said, he ultimately does join the good guys, when he becomes the unlikely vessel of the Alpha Trion protocols, ancient data containing a map to the Allspark, essentially making him a reluctant chosen one. But see, it isn't loyalty or heroism that pulls him into the conflict, but circumstance. But back to the movies, where Rise of the Beasts continues that Bee story. Directed by Stefan Capel Jr., Bumblebee is more the established veteran, the older statesman, or rather maybe the cool uncle, passing the underdog torch to Mirage, which I dig. Along with a new identity for Bee quietly introduced around this time that would take on a life of its own, the designation B127, which makes sense. I mean, how can you be named after something that doesn't exist in your world? Or does it? Sorry, I digress. For a robot, a mechanical being, a serial number designation seems more apt. That idea proved resonant enough that the 2024 animated prequel feature, Transformers 1, built an entire origin story around it. Here, B127 isn't an elite scout or a seasoned warrior. He's a cogless laborer, a transformer who can't actually transform, stuck doing waste management on sub-level 50 of Icon City. He's isolated, he's overlooked, and his solution to loneliness is to build imaginary friends out of scrap metal, EP508, Steve, and Aatron. a direct nod to voice actor Keegan-Michael Key's substitute teacher sketch. A funny little Easter egg that tells you everything about the tone of this version of the character, because despite being designated B127, he goes around calling himself Badassatron, projecting this hyper-competent persona that is completely at odds with his actual situation. Definitely a polarizing take, but I like it. It's fresh, it's unique, and my daughters love it. So it's all good with me. Plus, knife hands. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So back to 2007, where the live-action movie wasn't the only Transformers project in motion. Running alongside it was Transformers Animated, a show that in early development actually had Hotshot slotted into the young, hyperactive lead role, which made total sense. Hotshot had been doing that job for 5 years. At that point, he was the guy. But Hotshot was switched out for Bumblebee at the very last minute because everyone involved could see what was coming. The 2007 Bay film was going to be massive, and Bumblebee was clearly going to be the breakout character. Aligning their new series with that momentum just made sense. The result was an animated Bumblebee who was visibly a synthesis of two characters. Bumblebee's name and visual DNA grafted onto Hotshot's impatient, speed-obsessed, slightly too confident for his own good energy. He was still the young underdog, still finding his place, but now with considerably more attitude about it. The scrappy rookie of the '84 cartoon had grown up watching too much TV and developed opinions. For better or worse, the Bay films permanently altered the template beyond animated. By the time Transformers Prime arrived in 2010, the creative team leaned fully into that cinematic Bumblebee, lethal, fiercely loyal, and mute. This version didn't communicate through radio clips though, but by electronic synthesized beeps and boops, essentially becoming the R2-D2 of the Transformers universe. And while Transformers Prime is an excellent show, that beep-boop speech pattern had curdled by this point into something less charming and more repetitive, annoying even, old. Thankfully, before the series ended, Bumblebee finally got his voice back. For good this time. Oh, and he also kills Megatron, impaling him through the chest with the Star Saber. Talk about hardcore. No longer the underdog, B was ready for the big time. In the sequel series Transformers Robots in Disguise in 2015, the writers made quite the bold choice of giving him the leadership role outright, making Bumblebee the commander of his own team on Earth. And thankfully, they didn't just give us a cookie-cutter Prime. Bumblebee brought a fresh angle to the whole leader dynamic. In essence, he was still a rookie, just on a whole other level. And unlike Hasbro's first attempt at this with Hot Rod in the '86 movie, who just swooped in to take the role, we knew B. We had grown up with him, so we became leaders alongside him. As unconventional as it initially sounded, if you ask me, Bumblebee as leader worked. Which brings us to the comics, and more specifically the IDW publishing run, arguably the most psychologically rich version of Bumblebee ever committed to print. But before we get there, I want to confess something. Growing up, I always kind of assumed the G1 Minibots, Bumblebee, Cliffjumper, Brawn, the whole crew, were basically kids, younger Transformers. It made intuitive sense to my kid brain. They're small, they're eager, they're less experienced. Obviously, they're young, right? And then at some point, I had to reckon with the fact that no, they're just short. Fully grown, fully mature robots who happen to be, well, small. Which actually makes Gears, who has the personality of a senior citizen complaining about the weather, make a lot more sense in retrospect. But back to B, who, just like in RID, takes on a major leadership role here. Not just of the Autobots, but of all of Cybertron. Here's the thing though, whereas previous incarnations of Leader B followed the visual cue of the Bay movies, presenting a fully sized, accomplished, and competent warrior, IDW's B was the B that we all knew from the original G1 cartoon. Little B, strength 2, firepower 1. And IDW is completely honest about how insane that choice seems, including to Bumblebee himself. Fellow Autobots are openly dismissive, seeing him as a mascot, the company logo, not a military commander. The writers dig directly into Bee's historic imposter syndrome and ask, can the underdog actually lead? Not inspire, not befriend, but lead, with all the hard, ugly decisions that entails. And to his credit, Bee does lead. But here's the twist. He didn't become leader during a time of war. He became leader during a time of peace. With the Great War over and Cybertronians, Autobots, and Decepticons alike working together to rebuild their world. To maintain this fragile peace, a provisional government is formed as a triumvirate. Bumblebee leads the remaining Autobots. A character named Metalhawk represents the civilian refugees returning to the planet, known as Nails, or non-affiliated indigenous lifeforms. And leading the defeated Decepticons, Starscream. Obviously, Bee and Starscream are absolutely not friends. The comic operates as a political thriller, with Bumblebee struggling under the burdens of leadership, while Starscream constantly schemes, manipulating the civilian population and the political climate to slowly seize more power. Oh, and in case you're wondering, Metalhawk gets backstabbed by Starscream and killed to further his agenda, because of course he does. However, the dynamic between Bee and Starscream takes a bizarre and surprisingly intimate turn later on in the series. When Bumblebee is seemingly killed, his consciousness becomes trapped in a realm called Infraspace, and he begins to manifest in the physical world as a ghost, a hallucination that only Starscream can see and hear. As Starscream eventually becomes the sole ruler of Cybertron, he finds himself incredibly paranoid and lonely at the top. With no one else to trust, he begins using the ghost of Bumblebee as a sounding board, confessing his deep-seated fears, emotions, and ambitions to the Autobot. In turn, Bumblebee acts almost like a conscience for the Decepticon, listening and actually offering guidance, because they're essentially stuck with each other in this state. They develop a genuine psychological connection, and Starscream eventually comes to consider Bumblebee a true friend. A friendship I'm pretty sure nobody had on their bingo card, but which is honestly quite perfect. The image of the ultimate underdog becoming the moral compass to a character who has none, one of the most self-interested Decepticons in the franchise. It's a unique take on Bee, adding a new dimension to the idea of him as leader, continuing to lead despite being physically sidelined through most of it. That said, the next company to take over after IDW took a completely different approach to sidelining Bumblebee. They straight up killed him. No Infraspace ghost situation here. In the very first issue of the Skybound Energon universe, in what I can only assume was a bid to do something new, the writers simply unalived Bumblebee. He's not ambushed mid-battle, he's not taken down by a major villain and goes out in a blaze of glory. His body is simply dormant and defenseless when he's shot, head blown off by none other than a newly revived Starscream. Just like that. Before the story has even properly started, the franchise's arguably most overexposed character is gone. And while there seem to be hints of a return at some point later on, well, yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing Bee anytime soon. And I think that's a bold and deliberate statement, because here's the thing about overexposure. It doesn't just harm the character who ends up everywhere, it actively suppresses everyone else around them. When one dude takes up that much narrative real estate, there's a whole cast of characters perpetually waiting in the wings, never quite getting their shot. I firmly believe that my favorite bot, Sunstreaker, was directly affected in exactly this way. Bumblebee essentially took over the role of the battle-effective yellow robot in most Transformers shows, where smaller, more story-focused casts went the Power Rangers route, with each character color-coordinated for easier identification. But nobody embodies that overshadowing more than Cliffjumper. At this point in the franchise's history, Cliffjumper had essentially become the Kenny of the Transformers world, the not Bumblebee, the red one, the guy who exists primarily to be killed off. So there's a real poetic justice in the Energon universe flipping the script. Bumblebee goes down in issue 1, and Cliffjumper finally gets to step out of that yellow shadow and be his own character. It's the franchise acknowledging, maybe for the first time in a very direct way, that sometimes the boldest creative choice is removing the icon to make room for everyone else. But again, back to B, who played one more unique role in his latest animated outing, Transformers Earthspark. Once again set after the end of the Cybertronian War, Earthspark gives us a Bumblebee who has survived and is now acting as a mentor to the Terrans, a new generation of Earthborn Transformers, and to the human family that becomes his anchor. A family that, I may add, is a mixed Filipino-American family, which to most may sound like a rather random detail, but I can appreciate because I'm Filipino. It's a version of Bumblebee we haven't seen before, one that marries the youthful energy of his earlier incarnations with the mature responsibility of his later years. He's not just the underdog anymore, he's the underdog who made it, trying to figure out what comes next. And weirdly, that might be the most relatable version of all. I'll be the first to admit, because of my natural disdain for overexposed characters, I am not the biggest fan of Bumblebee. But even I can't deny just how complex and interestingly unique this guy has become through the years. Most archetypes stay static. The rookie stays the rookie. The mascot stays the mascot. But Bumblebee broke that mold. Not all at once, and not always gracefully, but over the decades he grew. From the cautious little scout who wanted to prove himself, to the traumatized survivor who was rebuilt as Goldbug, to the cinematic icon who couldn't speak but could make you feel anything, to the reluctant leader who turned out to be exactly what was needed, to the veteran mentor still figuring out who he is on the other side of the war. Whatever stage of life you're in, there's probably a version of Bumblebee you can relate to. The one who felt too small for the room, the one who had to rebuild from nothing, the one who surprised everyone including himself, the one who realized leadership wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. He grew up, and depending on when you came to this franchise and where you are right now, he might have grown up with you, right there on your toy shelf. So with that said, let's talk toys. And there are many. So rather than giving you a comprehensive breakdown of everything and killing myself, I'll be focusing on a chosen few significant or favorite ones of mine through the years. Starting with the 1984 G1 Bumblebee, which I personally never had. Although I did have a Chinese knockoff that I ended up getting during one of my many desperate hunts for my actual favorite yellow car, Sunstreaker, which I never found. The next significant Bumblebee toy, in my opinion, came over 20 years later with the Classics Bumblebee, the toy that marked Bumblebee's formal return after the long trademark drought. Even if he didn't transform into his iconic Beetle alt mode, his sleek new little hatchback is close enough. And his bot mode is basically what we all remember from the cartoon. Which brings us to the live-action movies, and a plethora of Camaro Bees through the years. And at this point, Bumblebee's overexposure was in full swing. With Bee now a household name, he was present in every movie toy line. Good toys and some not so good. There would never be a shortage of this version of Bee. Let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. Personally, I've always loved the first movie Bee with the automorph gimmick, and who straddled his battle knife weapon between his thighs in alt mode. I'm also a huge fan of the later Battle Blade Bumblebee from 2010 with the flip-down battle mask. Later movie versions had him transform back into his iconic Volkswagen for the Bumblebee movie, and a sort of Mad Maxified Camaro for Rise of the Beasts. And of course, we can't forget the movie masterpiece Bees, of which I ended up getting knockoffs that were arguably better and cheaper than the official ones. Transformers Animated got a rather oversized Bee, which, despite me being a huge fan of the series, I passed on, opting instead for the simpler Activators Bee for my shelf. It just fit better size-wise. And if this makes any sense, we also got a G1ified animated Legacy Bee a few years later. And as expected, Bumblebee got his toys as part of pretty much every modern Transformers series. Transformers Prime, Robots in Disguise, and, even if I don't think this version really added anything unique to the character, Cyberverse. And then Earthspark, and of course, Transformers 1. But as cool as all those versions are, I will always go back to the OG G1B. Some of the best modern representations of which, in my opinion, include the War for Cybertron B released in 2020, transforming into a realistic-looking Volkswagen, though the parts-forming rear is a bit controversial with some fans. The Studio Series 86B, released in 2024, gives us a more cartoonish and compact alt mode, which is my personal choice. Although many prefer the one based on the Devastation video game released in 2026, which I admit, yeah, it looks better, but isn't tune accurate in my book because for me, Bumblebee wears shoes, not boots. And speaking of video games, if you like your bee looking a little more Cybertronian, there's this guy, based off the War for Cybertron game. But if you ask me, Origin Bumblebee, released in 2021, is my choice for a pre-Earth bee. But if you're after a major nostalgic trip, I give you the Missing Link Bumblebee, released in 2024. The original toy, now with articulation. Buyer beware though, a common issue has the right foot locking up during transformation. And don't be like me, who ended up stupidly shearing off my bee's foot right off. And finally, if you're a masterpiece collector, you've got two options. MP21, released in 2014, which gives a perfect balance of the toy we grew up with and the one we watched in the cartoon, and comes packed with his OG buddy Spike. Or is that Daniel? And then MP45, released in 2019, which, while completely tune accurate, many would say is a floppy, overly complicated engineering mess. I was quite happy with MP21 and had no plans to switch, but I eventually picked up a much cheaper knockoff version of MP45 that was more solidly built, because despite its shortcomings, I just feel it has more personality on the shelf. And speaking of personality, those mini-bots sure had a lot of them, didn't they? Despite their small size. Like this dude right here, Huffer, a brilliant Autobot engineer who unfortunately is better known for his incessant whining. But I promise there's more to him than that. If you want to know what I mean, you can check out his story here. Or if you want my latest video, I've got that over here. Either way, thanks for watching and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Have you had enough of Bumblebee? Or do you want more? Go ahead and tell me your story.